Hello, welcome to another Expats Portugal video, where it's our mission to help you easily find all the information you need about moving to or settling in Portugal. So if you're watching for the first time, ensure you press the subscribe button so you never miss anything coming from Expats Portugal. And of course, the bell, so you'll be alerted every time some new content is put onto the YouTube channel. Tonight, we're delighted to be highlighting some of the biggest mistakes to avoid, not to make, but to avoid when transferring money abroad. And who better to talk to us than our special guest tonight, Sarah Davey from Spartan FX, a well-known face with our Expats Portugal community. Please feel free then to chat, and we'll put your comments in the chat and ask questions in there, and we'll get back to you. If not during this recorded part, then thereafter. And if you'd like to be part of our live audience in the future on these webinars, ensure you join us as a member. Join us as a member at our site, expatsportugal.com. So good evening to you, Sarah. I understand you've come back from a holiday and you've been somewhere rather nice.
Yes, that is true. But to be honest, I did think of you though, Carl, because, you know,
That's so sweet of you. Thank you.
The lifestyle of sort of, you know, obviously, you know, being by the water or the nice weather, you know, I can completely see why people want to, you know, move to Portugal in the same way they might move to the Caribbean, just for that lifestyle. It was definitely a slow sort of pace of life, which was nice. We're so coming back here, we're just so fast paced. Whereas I felt that when I was in Lisbon before I was away, just everybody, I don't know, just takes things a little bit slow, which is nice. They make the time for lunch, and I like that.
And that's in the capital city of Portugal. And then, of course, by the water where you've been here on the Silver Coast at San Martino de Porto. So fair to say then, we've got Caribbean vibes here on the Silver Coast and all around Portugal.
Yes. Well, actually, it's interesting. Someone said to me today, because we managed to see some humpback whales, which is very rare. But somebody said apparently in April, you might be able to see them in the Azores.
Amazing. The similarities continue then between the Caribbean, as I say it, Caribbean, as I know some of our friends here say it tonight, and Portugal, and it's an autonomous regions as well. Fantastic. Okay, it did sound a little bit negative, didn't it? Talking about mistakes when moving currency around, but we're going to be talking about that tonight so that the folks here can avoid making those mistakes. I think it's very educational and illuminating, isn't it? Some of the pitfalls that have
Absolutely. I mean, we always try to be very positive because it is exciting. You're going to move to Portugal, and you know that's the sort of happy story around it. But you know, there's a few sort of feedback we've had from people where they actually, what might be beneficial is to just sort of hear what not to do. Or you know, we've had, unfortunately, dealing with a lot of customers in a similar position. You know, some have used us from the start, that's great, but a lot of customers haven't, and maybe have used another provider or used their bank. And now they found us, and generally they do say we wish we'd found you sooner, but obviously through them we can hear some stories of the problems that they've encountered, and hopefully if I can share them with you, then you can avoid those as well.
Okay, brilliant. So we'll start with the biggie, shall we, which is price.
Absolutely. I think throughout the whole thing, in fact, actually, I think Carl coined it, but there's sort of 3 steps to currency confidence. All of this is set really around 3 key themes, which is sort of the price on the day when you're using your bank, for example, you're using us, then it's exchange rate movements, and then there's process. So we'll go into those in more detail. But the price side of things, you know, we've had customers that have used their bank, for example, done some transfers. We had one customer in particular use their bank last year. They'd done various amounts, but I think in total it was up to about $1 million they'd done overall. It was with Bank of America, and he checked, and basically found that the bank had charged him no transfer fees. So they told him it was free to make the transfer, but the exchange rate, what they were charging him was 5%, which is, you know, hurt,
yes,
to say the least. And we've heard a few reports that Bank of America have charged about sort of 5 or 6%. It varies bank to bank, and also varies depending on the type of account you have. We've seen some really good deals that some accounts have offered customers, but then we've seen 3 to 4%. As I said, this recent example was 5%, and I think about over 12 months ago we've seen a customer charge 9% by their US bank. So it does happen. So don't always assume that you're going to get a good rate through your bank. It is always worthwhile double checking.
I don't suppose you've ever heard someone say they got a great rate, have you? I mean, generally the advice has been to steer well clear of banks. It's not their core business, is it? And I meant to ask you this actually when we started about banks at the moment. An interesting time to be in financial services, perhaps a little spicy and wobbly, the energy of the banking sector at the moment, certainly. How is that affecting you at Spartan FX?
Absolutely. Yeah, there is a lot of volatility at the moment. We've seen it over the last 12 months with, well, longer than that. I mean, on Sunday, it was our 3-year anniversary of lockdown. So, we've had a pandemic, we've the Russia and Ukraine war, which is still ongoing. And should there be any changes to that, then we could see a dramatic movement then in the exchange rate, which would probably strengthen the euro. But certainly for the US dollar, there's a few issues going on. We've already had inflation. Which is why the Fed have been increasing interest rates over the last 12 months. But they decided to stop doing that, or we're looking at possibly not doing it as aggressively. Now what we've got obviously the Silicon Bank has gone under. The challenge is that too many people were trying to draw their money out of the bank, and they didn't have the reserves available. So where the money was in bonds, they had to sell them very quickly at a loss. And that's what happened. The bank went under. Now, the reason why they've come out and said they'll underwrite it is because they want to stem panic, because if they didn't, then more banks would encounter that issue, that customers would want to withdraw their money out very quickly and they wouldn't have those cash reserves. So what we weren't sure was what they were going to do on the recent rate announcement, because they could have cut the rates, which would have helped the banking sort of system. That was one of the things they could have done. But we think that they decided to increase it slightly because, they're still trying to tackle inflation. They don't think that that's going to massively impact growth, or the data's shown that it hasn't. But also, I suppose they don't want to show there's a big problem. I think if they cut the rates, it might have emphasized there is a bigger banking issue, and that might have scared a few people. So it's really tricky for them to know what to do, because doing something to help would actually maybe have a negative effect, because people would panic more, thinking, oh gosh, there's more of a problem, right? I need to get my money out of banks. So that going on obviously did impact the US dollar, and that's really what we're looking at, which moves on really nicely to the sort of exchange rate movements. Is that people often underestimate that, but that's where we often can save customers more money, and that's where you might see a bigger impact. Is certainly when you're looking at working out your budgets and how much things are going to cost you, even whether it be the visa, whether it be a property. You're working on an exchange rate save today, but when you need to make those payments, what's the rate going to be then? I mean, in the last 3 months, if you were transferring 250,000 euros, the difference is about 10,000 US dollars. If we go back 6 months, the difference is probably closer to 30,000. So what does that buy you? That could be your car.
Yes,
so we're trying to help customers sort of manage that, because everybody's situation is different. Your time frames are different. When you need to move money is different. You're working at different paces. But we've had customers, for example, have bought euros last year when it was closer to parity, and we're holding those euros on account. Now, obviously, hindsight's a great thing. Those people have already done it. Maybe you haven't. Don't worry. Again, it's always sort of, we work in sort of snapshots in a way, because if you're thinking, right, I need to make a payment now, you're working in a very tight time frame. But then if you kind of move that out between your 6 to 12 months, what does that look like? And actually, if we move that even bigger, if we look at the exchange rate overall, if you are selling US dollars and you are buying euros, it's still actually a good time to do it. It's not as good as it perhaps was last year, but it still is a good time. But as I said, if you're focusing just on a small time frame, you think, oh, it wasn't as good as it was last year. But if you move it out, it is actually still a relatively good time to be buying your euros.
Okay, so open out, have a bigger picture on this, and don't lament the past. And we were joking, weren't we, before we started this evening, that some people will be able to tell their grandchildren they bought at parity with the dollar and the euro. Okay, thank you for that. That's dealing with exchange rate movements there. And if there's anything about this that you don't understand, or you have further questions on any of these particular issues, feel free, please, to ask in the chat, and we'll come to you when we've just finished going through these main points with Sarah. Another issue where people have fallen foul, Sarah, and thank you for your comments, by the way, on the big financial picture as well just then. Another place where people have fallen foul is with compliance within their own banks or other financial institutions. How to avoid that?
Absolutely. We've seen it with a couple of different situations. So one is where a customer has perhaps used another online provider. You're probably aware of them, Wise, for example. And what happens is that a couple of customers have encountered this issue where they've exchanged US dollars into euros. The payment is about to go out, and then it's been stopped and they haven't released the euros. And then they're requesting documentation before they'll send that money out. Now, a few of the clients have then sent documents in, but perhaps they haven't been correct for one reason or another. Very difficult to speak to somebody to try and sort of explain or find out what's wrong or what they need to be sending in. And as a result, they haven't been able to speak to anyone. They haven't been able to upload the right documents. And then basically they've had a message to say, we've converted your money back and we've closed your account. So then they then had to find another solution to then move the money, especially obviously if you have a deadline to make as well, to maybe purchase a property or pay for your visa, then obviously it's held up that payment until A, you can provide the documents, or B, you have to find another solution if your account's been closed. And then we've seen customers where they've used the bank, and what happens is that when the money's been sent to the beneficiary, so whether that be your account in Portugal or to a third party, the bank might have flagged that payment and wants to know a little bit more about it. You know, how did you acquire your source of funds? What's the reason for the transfer? And what happens is the bank sends a message back to your bank to request this information. Now, I'm sure some people that are further down the journey that are trying to open up a bank account in Portugal have seen that the banking system is quite slow, and communications with people in a bank are quite slow as well. So there's always that challenge. And we've had customers say that their money's been held up for a week or more until this can be resolved. So what we do is we get all the compliance documents you need up front. And then we have that information so that if we do get a message from the beneficiary bank, we can act on it very quickly, and often with very little delay, the money's then sent on. So we've seen it in sort of two instances where it generally is around the compliance of the moving money. Generally over about 10,000, you'll need some sort of documentation. It's really money laundering, really, just to prove that how you've acquired that money is of legitimate source and why you're doing it, why you're sending it to Portugal, for example.
Good to be aware of. Thank you for that. So yeah, that could come up and it can cause problems as well. Laurie, we'll come to you in just a moment. Just do one more point of these pitfalls and mistakes that people can make and how they can be avoided by working with Spartan FX here. Sarah Davey joins us from spartanfx.co.uk, and you can open a free currency account with them by going to that website, spartanfx.co.uk. And you can see there's an email address on the screen as well if you want to drop Sarah a line too, which is personal@spartanfx.co.uk. This is one of the most gutting ones, I think, when you can't transfer your money when you've left your country of origin. Or we could call it the home country, but I guess the new country is the home country, isn't it? Let's call it the country of origin. Here you are wanting to do the transfer. You open up your laptop in your Airbnb or your place, and you get something flagged up on the screen to say, no, can't do that. And that same horrible feeling where you just assume you can make a convenient and quick transfer, and something happens, and you might even need to go home. That's happened, isn't it, to people?
It is. I mean, I know that I talk about this nearly every time I'm on a show or whatever, but the reason I do is because we see it time and time again. It's one of the biggest things that really comes up, I'd say, more than anything, all of the rest, is that when you're there as you said, in your country of origin, so if you're in America or UK or Canada or Australia, fine, you can make the transfers very easily because you're there. So if they need anything, you very easily can go into the branch, it can be sorted out. When you not in, even if you haven't moved, if you're just on a scouting trip and you want to move some money, what generally tends to happen is you then start to encounter some more problems. So it's things like, as you said, the online banking sometimes, well, it does have an online limit that you can move money every day. Now, depends on your bank. It could be about 10,000 US dollars. It could be more. But again, depending on what you're doing, especially if it's more sort of property or larger transfers, you're going to have to be making a transfer every day for 2 weeks, perhaps, just to get the right amount, for example. Now, it may be that you can speak to your bank before you go away. They might be able to raise that for you. But again, it's sort of bearing those sort of things in mind. We've had customers where, because they suddenly want to do maybe, even I suppose you've been there maybe a few months and you want to start transferring some larger sums, all of a sudden the bank's like, great, that's fine. This is a larger amount. We need more level of authorization from you. Come into branch and fill in that form, which is not going to be physically possible for you to do that.
Sure.
Sometimes it might be a case of, with some banks, for example, I think it's SunTrust, you need an international card reader. Now, you can apply for them in branch very easily, but it's something I think you have to apply for when you're, as I said, in your home country. If there's any paperwork that you need to fill in, sometimes it might just be a case of filling out a form and signing that. We've seen customers give, again, obviously depends on your relationship, but we've seen people give their family power of attorney. So that's helped them. We've also seen with limits, which is a more recent thing that we've seen in the last couple of months, with a customer who was buying a property and she found out that her bank had a limit on how much she could do every 30 days. And it was 70,000 US dollars.
And that's probably going to be more prevalent, isn't it? Because people don't want, or the banks don't want people to be taking out large sums of money at the moment. So that may change and become more common, of course.
Well, yeah, quite possibly. So she was buying a property and basically had to fly home. Otherwise, it would have taken her 6 months to buy that property and make that transfer. Wow. So we often, unfortunately, do see a lot of times that people have to fly back. So we want you to try and avoid that. What research, what can you do before you go? The other thing as well is that certain accounts won't make international transfers. So certain maybe brokerage accounts, or I think credit union accounts. So that's another thing to bear in mind, or even just some basic accounts. So, maybe you need to move it into another account that you have. Some clients have actually opened new bank accounts with a bank in America, for example. I think, for example, we've had customers that we've helped them open an account with Charles Schwab. I think you've got to have it in for 10 days before then you can move the money back out. But it may be that there's some other solutions that we can find that makes it easier for when you've moved to Portugal.
But there is a theme here, isn't there? Start earlier rather than later. Don't try and do these things in a hurry, because if you do encounter these problems or the aforementioned compliance problems, you're going to wish you'd started the process a whole lot earlier. So I don't think it can be too early to start the process, can it? But as we discovered, it could certainly be too late.
Absolutely. I mean, when the money's with us, we can move money very quickly. It can be in people's accounts within 2 hours, but bank clearing times are out of our control, and every bank varies. So if you are trying to meet deadlines, you don't want to leave it to the last minute to then find that the bank has a 3-day clearing time and you need that money ASAP, or there's things like that. And as you said, the research of what you need to do to move the money, all of this is doing it in advance. The longer you give yourself, the more options you might have available, and really the easier that it could be, that transfer.
Very good. Thank you. We'll pause there on the points for a moment. There are more to come on the mistakes and pitfalls. We'll cover those. Let's go to Laurie, who's been very patient. And if you prefer not to ask your question publicly, wait till the end of the recording. That's anybody who wants to do that. But I think Laurie's happy to share this halfway through. Laurie, good evening to you.
Hi. Yeah. Sarah, thank you so much. I am a Spartan client. Love Steve. Say hi. But my question is, I already transferred money so that I could open my Portuguese bank account. That's covered. I have more of a question for monthly issues. When I move to Portugal, which will be November, I'm going to have two sources of income. One is the rental from my condo in Scottsdale, and the other is Social Security. My plan was to keep the rental income just going to my US bank and just live off my Social Security. Now, again, exchange rate is better with you guys, I assume. I do already have a Charles Schwab checking. Oh, and FYI, if you already have a Charles Schwab checking, it averages 3 days for you to get the money when you do a transfer. So, but my question, my original plan was, when I made the move to Portugal, have my Social Security directly deposited into Schwab. Is there a possibility, because I'm assuming your exchange rate is better than Schwab, is there a possibility of having funds monthly deposited with you for the exchange rate process, and then set up somehow an automatic deposit where it would go into my Portuguese bank?
Great question, Sarah.
Good question. Well, certainly in the rate perspective, we are better than Schwab. And as I said, we actually do recommend Schwab to some clients. Right. As I said, we help them get their account open. So if we couldn't do a better deal, we wouldn't be sending people there, obviously. Yeah, certainly. I mean, it depends where the money is coming from. As long as that provider, whether it be rental income or, we can accept payment. If you've sold your house, say in America, and you're receiving funds from a lawyer, we can accept those. So as long as they can send the money to us, then that's perfectly fine. And then we can set something automated from our end into your Portuguese account.
Okay. And do you know if that includes U.S. Social Security, if they're one of the entities that will allow direct deposit to a Spartan account?
Let me double check. I'll have to double check. I've heard that in some cases, yes, but I wouldn't want to categorically say yes and then you find there's an issue.
we know it happens, don't we?
That monthly option thing. I mean, or rather in terms of pre-scheduling, transfers. That's great to know. I didn't know you could do that. So.
Yeah, we can do that for you.
I'm glad you asked for yourself and other people, Laurie. That's great. And thank you for your hesitation there, Sarah, because we know that's possible. Some people do it, but quite right to check before giving a categorical yes, affirmative on that.
Because the challenge is, as I said, that's what I found more so really with America. It's fascinating, the banking system there, really, because it is down to state level. So we've got a customer that has, they bank with the same bank, they have the same type of account, but one lives in one state and one lives in another, and they're charged differently or acts differently. So it can be a bit more of a challenge to sometimes say categorically yes on some things, just because we encounter those sort of issues or
variables. American variables, we'll call them for the time being, from state to state. They do exist, don't they? Thank you, Laurie. Really helpful. Thank you for that. And you may have more questions when we conclude the recording after a few more points and mistakes that we would like to help you avoid this evening. Mike's in from sunny South Florida. Beautiful beach day, and now ready for some Portugal time. Our pleasure. Boa tarde. Still in South Carolina for another month, then Braga. And Stuart was away overnight at the embassy in Dublin for the D7 process. Nice one. Mike T also says, I wish I'd calculated in the exchange rate prior to purchasing 3 properties in Portugal. I bet you did. The exchange rate completely put me over budget. I just didn't know about a service like this. Glad I do now. So there you go. Another mistake that Mike is glad to share there so that others don't have to make it. So let's go now, if we could, Sarah, to bank details and making sure they're right and some of the problems that happen either fraudulently or accidentally.
Absolutely. I mean, again, we don't want to talk about fraud, but it does happen, and it's becoming more and more common, unfortunately. I could probably count on my hand even experiences of family and friends that have encountered it just sending, internally in the UK. If you're receiving any bank details over email, you always want to check them before you send it, because, there's human error. Someone's putting it in, they could easily have missed a digit off or changed or whatever. And emails get intercepted. And certainly if you're using, for example, you go to your bank or you're using an online provider, as long as those account details are a legitimate account, the computer says tick, these details are an account, it will send. So it could go off to the wrong account, which we wouldn't want. So always do check. I mean, that's something that we do. We always ring the beneficiary and check. But if you're not using us, please do always do that whenever you're sending any money to anybody. Even if you were sending money in the US to someone else in the US, please do that as well. And the other thing as well I would recommend is that if you have not sent money to that account before, do a small test. Now, people might say, well, that might cost me a little bit more because maybe I'm charged a bank transfer fee. But at the end of the day, I'd rather pay $20, send 100 US dollars and lose that than lose 100,000 US dollars.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Excellent. Oh, and to mention to everybody that at 9 o'clock tonight, it's the Dream Team. Of course, Queen of the Visas will be here. I know Dr. Michael will be joining us as well. So if you want some help transferring your medical matters over from America or wherever you're coming from for that matter, Michael will be around and he has an announcement to make with the Dream Team at 9, an hour from now. Exactly. Okay, let's move on to the Portuguese bank account. Actually, no, let's do tax first before we go to Portuguese bank accounts. I think everyone moved to the edge of their seat when I said Portuguese bank accounts. We'll hold on that for a moment and talk about tax for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, just really wanted to touch briefly on the tax because we're not tax specialists. We specialize in foreign exchange and moving money. You know, you've got your visa specialist, you've got your mortgage broker, you've got your estate agent. All of us, well, you've got the Dream Team, everybody's specialist in their field. So really you're kind of using all of us at some stage as part and parcel of this journey. But certainly tax, we don't get involved with it. We don't have to report anything to anybody. And it's not something we can advise on. So I'd always recommend that you always speak to a specialist when it comes to your tax. But we are aware that obviously, unfortunately for you Americans, you have to declare where your money is everywhere, anytime. So if you do use us and you have an account and you've made any transfers, you know, we often have clients ask us loads of questions because they're filling the F-bar. So any information you need around the account you have, around the statements, around the transactions, we can provide all that for your F-bar. But as I said, it's something you need to do. Please be aware of, but always speak to a tax specialist on that front.
That's great. Really clear. Thank you very much. So Portuguese bank accounts. And any information we can get about Portuguese bank accounts, the best ones to open, the easiest ones to open, best branches and personnel, all of that gratefully received. And the information you have to give us about the Portuguese banking system, Sarah. What's your experience? What do people say to you when they're talking about their Portuguese bank accounts generally?
Well, generally it takes a while to open, unfortunately, and the emails backwards and forwards can be quite slow. I'm afraid. Not so great. I mean, ultimately, if the banks could do a better job, we wouldn't be in business. I would essentially say that, you know, because there wouldn't be a need for us.
That's fair.
Which is fair. I mean, we can act in a similar way to a bank account, and as far as the accounts in your name, which is really helpful when you're sending money from especially a lawyer or any third party, as long as you're given bank account details, we can send them. So I joke about the poor man, but we paid, you know, fees to a lawyer, fees to a visa agent, fees to a relocation agent. We paid lawyers for a property. We paid, I suppose the ones are a bit different. We paid art galleries, we paid auction houses, we paid for yachts and people chartering private jets.
Oh, wow. Okay. If I was doing that, I would ring up Spartan and say, the name's Bond, James Bond. I need a jet payment made immediately. And is it Carl? Is it you again? Yeah. You're not really going on a jet, are you? No. Bye, Carl. Okay, that's fantastic. Really helpful. And when you say the pool man, you know, like actually or metaphorically, you're talking about the smaller payments, but for anyone who's got an IBAN, it can be paid to that number.
Absolutely. Yeah. And people use us very much. I mean, even when you've got your Portuguese bank account open, you can still use us, but people are using us in advance of getting your Portuguese one open for a number of reasons. One, they need to make payments, as we've said, to various different people. Maybe they're paying fees for various services. We've touched on the fact that you can buy euros in advance. So that's something that we do offer. We're holding at the moment, as I said, for many customers, euros on account free of charge. Also, we have had some customers where they've opened an account. One woman, for example, she's living in America. She's got a Portuguese bank account open, but she's not very good at working the online banking for the Portuguese account. So we're making her payments to third parties for her rather than doing it through her bank, because she's not.
Wow. Where else are you going to get that? What a great level of service. And that's why Laurie said, if you were thinking, hold on a minute, Laurie knows somebody called Steve at Spartan. That's the level of friendliness that occurs, and you don't get that with many institutions these days, do you? So, and it's a constant source of comfort and joy to hear people name checking your colleagues. For me, Sarah, I suspect it is for you too. Is that everything about Portuguese bank accounts?
I think the only other thing as well is if you're paying for a golden visa, I know obviously that's still alive at the moment, is that you have to pay for the visa from a Portuguese bank account, but also the money needs to be in your name throughout the whole process. So with some of the brokers, they don't have client accounts that are in your name, so it would just be a general client account, which means the money actually wouldn't be in your name through the whole process, which is important. So that's fine with us. The money is in your name throughout the whole process.
Gold dust, that could save a lot of trouble for somebody, couldn't it? Whilst we still have the golden visa or not, as the case may be. We'll find out in due course. We've got a couple of questions that we can deal with on the recording here before we pause it, and people can ask more personal questions if they wish. Jim, good to see you here this evening in South Carolina, and another month to go until Braga. Fantastic news there. Susie asks this question: we're coming for a scouting trip in June. My thought is we open an account with you soon and exchange some US dollars to have held at Spartan. When on our scouting trip, attempt to open our Portuguese bank account, then move the dollars from Spartan to the bank account. Right? Question mark. That sounds like a plan, doesn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. But yeah, you'll exchange the US dollars to euros, and then we can put that money wherever you specify.
Okay, which has inspired the question. A nice try here, the Global Nobles. Knowing that it's best to transfer money well in advance of needing it, do you receive interest on the money that Spartan FX is holding until you need to use it?
No. So that's where it's slightly different. So no, right. You don't earn any interest. We generally hold money as a sort of extra service, but we don't charge for that facility. It is free. So again, it depends on your situation. Some people are doing that. The other option, which actually we haven't spoken about, is a possibility, and actually could be a solution for that, because if you're holding your money in a higher interest earning account, it depends on the time frames. I mean, generally people are probably holding it for a maximum of 6 months. You know, where would it be? Would you be earning more interest wherever it is? That's your situation. But one of the things that you can do, which is quite good also for property purchases, is that if you didn't want to buy all the euros upfront in advance, we have an option where you can fix the rate, but you only pay us 10% of the amount that you need. So it's not a cost or a charge. The 10% locks you into the rate because we buy all the currency up front. So it's a protection for us. And then when you need the full amount, you pay the remaining 90%, and then it goes out at the rate you've agreed. So for example, if you fix the rate today, often then a property purchase completes in, say, 6 to 12 weeks, or there could be a delay. So say in 12 weeks time, you transfer the rest of the money to us. We send it all out, all the euros to your lawyer, but it's on the rate that you've agreed today.
That's good. So although you don't pay interest, understandably, that will be a way of dealing with that.
Yes, so that you would then retain 90% of the total amount that you wanted to transfer, and that 90% could then be in the
interest earning account of your choice. And if anyone does know a good interest earning account, you should probably share it with everyone else here, because there's not many of those around at the moment. Okay, I think probably the last question we'll take in this particular section of the session tonight is from Barack. What is your exchange rate based on, and what is the current rate? So that's quite a good place to end, isn't it, the current rate? But I think we can broaden that question to, how does it work? How does Spartan make their money?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's no transfer fees. We just make our money on the rate. I like to explain it very much similar to how you pay for other products, for example, generally there's a wholesale price. So in our environment, it's called an interbank rate, which is basically the wholesale price that banks and financial institutions, people like ourselves, are buying at. And that's a rate that consumers wouldn't have access to. So we're buying at this better rate of exchange, and then we sell to you at a consumer price, very much, as I said, similar to how you pay for products. There's a wholesale, and then the markup is where we earn our money.
There you go. That's how it works, Barak. And probably rather than put you on the spot and ask you for the current rate, which will change anyway, won't it, by the time the webinar is over, probably. The broader question, how did the Federal Reserve meeting affect the exchange rate in these last 24 hours? Was that a big impact?
Yeah, so I mean, the thing is, with what normally moves the market is not necessarily the interest rate movement, interest rate announcement itself, as in what they've done, whether they've increased interest rates or had them on hold. It's whether it's gone against expectations. So if we've expected that and it's come out as expected, then there's often little movement. As I said, there was a little bit more uncertainty around this one, as I mentioned at the beginning, because we weren't sure what direction they were going to take. We've already had it out that they were talking about maybe not increasing it as aggressively as before, because they want to try and help the economy. If they don't increase the rates as aggressively, that's not as good for the US dollar, unfortunately, but it's better for the economy. But we thought that they may reduce rates slightly to help with the banking situation. But as I said, I think they may have erred on the sort of caution on that, because they didn't want to scare people and think that there's a real issue going on. The other thing that we do look at as well, which actually moves the market more, is the sentiment, what they come out and say after the meeting.
Yeah,
that's really what we're looking at. But I would say the issues at the moment is they're not raising rates, I don't think, as aggressively as they did before. The ECB, European Central Bank, they're starting to increase rates. They're starting to follow the trend that the Fed did last year. So we may see more euro strengthen if they continue that path. They're doing it very differently. The other thing we've got to watch out for is that, are there going to be other banks that encounter this problem? If they don't stem that sort of people worried, then people might want to draw their money out from other banks, and we may have a problem, because at the end of the day, they can't underwrite every bank. Yeah. So the US dollar could drop off sharply from that. The other thing as well is that, I think I've mentioned in a few of my other webinars, the US dollar is seen as a safe haven currency. So as soon as there's any sort of issues, people do tend to flock to it. But obviously the problems are happening in the US at the moment. So people are perhaps a little bit hesitant to put their money into the US dollar from that perspective. We still got the Russia war still going on in the background. So if anything changes to that, then we may see some movement. It would strengthen the euro.
Thank you for your analysis and insight there. And one thing very thoughtfully that Laurie suggested to us, Sarah might want to mention that the funds, your funds when with Spartan, are insured like the US's FDIC program for banks, while it's in Spartan's safekeeping there. Would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of things in place. So first of all, in some countries, you don't need any licensing and able to do business, but for some you do. So for example, here in the UK, you need to have to be FCA authorized and regulated. And also, if you're dealing with any Americans, you need to be registered with FinCEN. You need a money transmitter license in the state that person lives in. So we have licenses in all states, so we're perfectly covered to be dealing with Americans. The other thing as well is, I mentioned about the accounts that are actually in your name, which is a little bit different with the way that it's set up. What that means is that the money is safeguarded, and if anything should happen to us as a company, you'd get all of your money back.
Cool. Okay, that's a reassuring note to end this part of the session, and the recorded part certainly of the webinar tonight. Mistakes and pitfalls to avoid there. Great job, Sarah. Never ceases to amaze me how you can make currency exchange such an educational and informative subject. So great job tonight. Thank you very much indeed. Do you have a last word?
No, just thank you for everyone for being here tonight and listening to us. And just I hope that, as I said, obviously it'd be great if you use us, please speak to the friendly team. There's a number of us that, you know, ask other Expat Portugal members, they've used us, so look at our reviews. But even if you don't, please just take some of the tips that I've mentioned away, especially around obviously the fraud and the things like that, that hopefully will help you.
Great. Okay. The easy way to find Spartan, of course, is in the Expats Portugal business directory under Spartan Effects. Great job, Sarah. Thank you so much, with added help from Laurie tonight. Thank you very much indeed. We'll pause the recording there.